David, it feels a little bit strange to not be in British Columbia with you. How are you today?
I'm very well, and I really enjoyed that visit. I think we covered a lot of ground, and actually, I think communicated the way we work, which is interesting and very different, I think, to a good audience. Over to you.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was a very nice trip. And, we learned a lot about the Picton Pig Farm. I think we might need to revisit that at some point in the near future. People are really interested to know what went on there. It's certainly one of the most bizarre and disturbing crimes that I'm aware of, and it ties into all these other things that are going on in the news. But you've brought something else to our attention today, David, and it was a big deal last week. It's the Iranian, what would you call it, an incursion onto this British oil tanker? What's the story for today?
Yeah, it was a helicopter-borne rappelling attack with quite sophisticated maneuvers or tactics executed allegedly by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. But I think, although I'm not a military guy, looking at the sophisticated and timing attack, I think they were coached by the British, but we can come to that a bit later.
And I watched what you had provided, and I wonder if, coaching by the British, sure, that's one thing. My question is, was it just British guys wearing masks? Because their skin looked pretty white, and I think Iranian people are a little darker.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And there were suggestions made. Now, I think the British military, and I'm sure other militaries around the world, they pride themselves on being able to communicate with hand gestures, right? And I don't know if you've ever watched a crane operator is looking down at someone on the ground, and they're making hand signals, thumbs up, thumbs down, etc., or inching it. And they land their load with great precision, even though they might be 200 feet above the point. Now, the British military, I'm sure other militaries do the same, about 2 weeks before the Royal Marines did a very similar attack by abseiling from a helicopter onto the Grace 1, which was an Iranian tanker, allegedly loaded with oil for Syria, which would be in conflict of, I don't know, United Nations or European Union policy. And what's intriguing is, as far as I know, maybe some of the experts listening would tell us, at no time ever have the Iranian National Guard ever launched a heli-borne rappelling attack on a tanker at sea. First of all, and I'm not saying they're not capable of it, it requires exquisite timing and synchronicity, because you've got to get your helicopter and your human beings in place with the right kind of skills at exactly the same point as the tanker to be boarded. So it's not impossible, but it's sophisticated. So I'm thinking, well, given the British skill at, is duplicity the right word? And I'm thinking, for example, of the man who never was story, where there was a guy floated off the coast, I think of Spain or Portugal, allegedly looking like he'd been involved in a plane crash, and he floats ashore and he's got all these top secret papers on him that gets the Germans to move 3 divisions to Greece and away from Sicily. And it's a wonderful film called The Man Who Never Was. The British are very good at that. I'm sure other nations, Israelis, etc., are very good at it. But isn't it a coincidence that there was a very unusual attack by British Marines on Grace 1, an Iranian tanker, and 2 weeks later, an identical attack, right, by allegedly Iranian National Guards on the steamer Impero? And I think both of those attacks used the same technology that we've been talking about for years. The fuller name now is, I think, C6ISR, Command Control Communications, Computers, Cryptography, and Cyber Intelligence and Surveillance and Reconnaissance, of the which Serco, as far as the Clinton government is concerned, and maybe the Trump government, is actually providing these services to the Marine Corps in the United States through, for example, Camp Pendleton base, where Serco has digital fires instructors, right, teaching the Marines how to handle vulnerabilities in the enemy. And of course, immediately I look at that and I'm thinking of some of your people who irritate you enormously, like this Steele guy and Swigert. That is to say,
David,
they seem to be
sorry to
operating.
interrupt.
Go
Sorry
ahead.
to interrupt, but I want to pause you for a second because you're talking about Pendleton. There was just an arrest that took place that I heard about. When you mentioned Camp Pendleton and the Marines, it reminded me of this story that I'm just trying to bring up for everybody here. It seems that 16 Marines have been arrested for human smuggling and drug charges. Really terrible accusations right there at the Marine base in Camp Pendleton.
And you know what? This is crazy because you've got Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, who thinks he's smart. Now you've got Boris Johnson, who's the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who thinks he's smart. But one of the great weaknesses of people in power is if they overestimate their own intelligence. And it's an easy trap to fall into because when you have trappings of power and a bunch of sycophants telling you how smart you are, you can be easily persuaded. Now, poor old Boris, he went to Oxford University, he studied classics, and apparently a great irritation to him is that he got an upper second degree, a 2-1, and not a first class honors degree. And I'm not patting myself on the back, but his degree is in classics and he didn't get a first. My degree is in engineering and I did get a first. Now, does that mean I'm smarter than Boris? Not necessarily, but
Probably.
maybe I can analyze Boris and his susceptibility to being hacked in his role as foreign secretary or prime minister better than he will ever be able to analyze myself and yourself when we go and investigate a crime like the one we investigated up in Vancouver a few days ago. Over to you.
Yeah. Boris Johnson is somebody I don't know too much about. I have a friend who lives in London, and I visited him when they had some bikes or something, like City Bike, and they were calling them Boris bikes. So this is something that maybe Americans aren't that dialed into. Theresa May is sort of pushed out as prime minister, and Boris Johnson is coming in. He previously was the mayor of London, so he's a political figure that we've heard about before. But David, of course, right now we're about halfway through our preview broadcast, and we're going to be going much more in depth on these topics, particularly this notion of something happening with this Iranian incursion, this seizure of a British oil tanker. We're going to dig into some of the details a bit more when our subscriber-only show takes over at just about 20 minutes from now, 1 p.m. on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. David and I have been really working hard to do some unique and interesting broadcasts, which included me traveling to British Columbia last week, doing some investigations into the Picton pig farm. And it's this type of work that makes it really important for people to sponsor the show, both David's show on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and Crowdsource the Truth in general, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. So David, the other notion that you're going to be introducing to the audience today is this concept of ghost AI. And without giving too much away, give us a bit of an overview of what you're getting at with that sort of new terminology that you're introducing today.
Well, thank you, Jason. I've been wrestling with this issue. I've been working in artificial intelligence for 40 years. I wrote a paper in 1981. It was published in 1983, warning of the danger of allowing what is supposedly artificial intelligence or expert systems of actually taking over decision making from human beings in the loop. And what's happening now is that people, maybe they didn't read my paper, they should, are allowing artificial intelligence to go rogue. Now, what you and I have both noticed, and many Americans and people in the Five Eyes countries have noticed, that the crime scene investigation at these major events like 9/11 or 7/7 underground bombing, or even this attack on the tanker, there is something happening to the sanctity, if that's the right word, or the protocols of crime scene investigation, where there's supposed to be a chain of custody of evidence. What I think Serco and Boris's friends, and quite possibly the friends of Donald Trump, have done is they've embedded what I call ghost AI into the Five Eyes intelligence networks. That's including financial, signals intelligence, and human intelligence, so that now the network has got a mind of its own, if you will. I call it GHOST. GHOST actually stands as an acronym, but I think it's a very convenient word because ghost is a ghost, like a, I don't know, a virtual wizard. GHOST stands for Guild-Controlled Hotels on Sportsbook Time. Now that's a technical, and we can go that into the Patreon only. But essentially, people who are inveterate or congenital gamblers, I allege that Trump and Boris Johnson are, because Boris Johnson was a member of the Bullingdon Club, which specialized in vandalism and intimidation at Oxford University. And they would go to a pub for a dinner party, they'd smash it up. Nominally, the proprietor of the pub or the inn or the hotel would report this to the police, but in the shadows, there'd be someone with a bag of money who would offer the owner of the inn or the pub or the hotel enough money for him to keep his mouth shut.
What's the point of that, David?
If you take that, it's actually controlling now, because now you have a criminal relationship, if you will, with an owner of a business who's been bribed or intimidated into not going to the police. If you look at the windows of the World Restaurant on 911, right, the owner of that business, I think, was intimidated into silence about what was going on the windows of the World Restaurant on 911, which I think was a sportsbook bet that would have allowed people to bet on the body counts of the Risk Waters group at the breakfast meeting on 911. So I think this term ghost AI may help people to get their heads around what is otherwise a very complex issue, maybe well beyond the capability of Boris Johnson or Donald Trump to understand. However, I argue that these two people, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the President of the United States, are now targeted by a very sophisticated attack where the people have actually planted ghost artificial intelligence in the intelligence networks that are giving them advice on how to react to the hijacking of the tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, here's what I predict, before we go on to Patreon, here's what I predict is going to happen. I think the powers behind Trump and behind Boris Johnson are going to tell them, all right, now you put on the facade of pressurizing Iran to disgorge this tanker, and that's going to make you look good. But in fact, they're the unwitting victims of fake news and a media play. So I think ghost AI, perhaps, basically guild-controlled hotels on sportsbook time, will be an easy concept for people to understand what's going on in the vicinity of a crime scene, like 7/7, or the attack on the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center, where people in nearby hotels are combining together to remove evidence or plant evidence at a crime scene. So the crime scene investigation goes nowhere. And I think you and I can fix that, basically. Jason, over to you.
Well, I think people are going to be very interested to hear the details of this, David, and they can join us just about 15 minutes from now on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. David, I also want to let our viewers know about your free webpage, which is reverse-CSI-scripts.com. I think we've got a lot more people watching us after that trip to Vancouver, and if those people want to learn more about you, David, and your daily posts, they can visit your website. You've also assembled a playlist of all the videos that we've done here on YouTube, so people can go back and see our visit to 425 Carroll Street, the amazing revelation of a person who lives down there, or at least was hanging around the downtown east side in Vancouver, who told us that this First Nations mural is a warning, and people were able to find new details in that image when we went down there. That was a really interesting visit. We're still trying to find out more about what specifically this warning may entail for the people the destitute people of Vancouver's downtown east side. But I'm certainly interested to find out more about this raid on the British tanker. It's certainly interesting that Iran has never done anything like that before, and England did it just a few weeks ago. I don't remember hearing anything about that Grace 1 tanker, so we'll get into some more details on that, and I look forward to seeing you and everyone else joining us in just a few minutes, David. I'll see you on Patreon and Subscribestar.
Thank you very much, Jason. Look forward to it. Bye.